The red dust of Mars swirled around James Miller's small outpost as he fixed the solar panels on his roof. 10 years after retiring from Earth's Special Forces, he enjoyed the quiet life on the edge of New Armstrong Colony. Most days, he tended his hydroponic garden, maintained his equipment, and watched the stars. Today was different. A bright light cut across the orange sky. Miller shielded his eyes and watched as something large and metallic crashed into the hills 3 miles from his home. He didn't call it in. After years of military service, his first instinct was to investigate himself. Probably just another supply drop gone wrong, he muttered, grabbing his old rifle and emergency kit. Miller drove his rover across the dusty plains. As he approached the crash site, he realized this was no human vessel. The ship's design was sleek and strange, with markings he'd never seen before. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered, parking a safe distance away. The ship's door hissed open. 4 tall, armored figures stepped out. They had 4 arms each and moved with a strange grace despite the heavy armor. Their helmets had no visible faceplates, just smooth, reflective surfaces. Miller didn't run. He didn't hide. Instead, he stepped out of his rover and raised a hand in greeting. "Welcome to Mars," he called out. "Rough landing." The aliens froze. Their weapons, long, tube-like things that hummed with energy, pointed at Miller. Inside the lead alien's helmet, General Krell of the Vex Empire watched through his soldiers' camera feed. He had expected the primitive human to flee or cower. Instead, this strange creature approached without fear. "Capture it," Krell ordered through the comm. "I want to know why it shows no fear." The aliens advanced on Miller, weapons raised. Miller sighed and held up his hands. All right. No need for that. Why don't we talk this over? I got beer back at my place." The aliens didn't understand his words, but their translation systems caught the non-threatening tone. They hesitated. Miller pointed to his rover. "Follow me. It's getting cold, and you look like you could use some help with your ship." 20 minutes later, the bewildered alien scouts sat in Miller's living room while he rummaged in his kitchen. "Don't get many visitors out here," Miller said, returning with 5 bottles of his home-brewed beer. He handed one to each alien and kept one for himself. "Cheers." The aliens stared at the bottles, then at each other. Miller popped his cap off and took a long drink. "Ah, that hits the spot. Now about why you folks crashed on my planet." On the Vex command ship orbiting Mars, General Krell watched the feed with growing concern. The human showed no fear. Worse, it was treating his elite scouts like guests. "This cannot stand," Krell growled to his second-in-command. "The human's behavior doesn't match our intelligence reports. They're supposed to be primitive and fearful." "Should we extract our scouts, General?" his officer asked. "No, send in the tactical team. I want that human captured and studied. There's something wrong here." Back at the outpost, Miller was showing the aliens his hydroponic garden while secretly studying their armor and weapons. He noticed the small cameras on their helmets and the way they constantly received instructions through their comms. "Someone's watching us," he thought, smiling at the aliens as he explained how tomatoes grow on Mars. As darkness fell, Miller's security system detected multiple vessels approaching fast. Miller just smirked. He grabbed another beer from his fridge and popped it open. "Looks like we're about to have company," he said to the confused scouts. "And I bet they're not coming for a friendly chat." The first contact had officially gone wrong for the aliens. Miller watched the radar screen as 30 small dots approached his outpost. He took another sip of beer, then turned to the 4 alien scouts who were still trying to figure out what to do with their bottles. "Your friends are coming," Miller said, pointing to the screen. "Lots of them." The aliens looked at each other. Their commander's voice barked orders in their helmets. "Secure the human. Tactical team is inbound." One alien stepped forward, all 4 arms reaching for Miller. Miller sighed. "And here I thought we were getting along." He pressed a button under his kitchen table. Metal shutters slammed down over all windows and doors. A second button opened a hidden panel in the floor. "Sorry about this," Miller said, dropping a small device that filled the room with thick smoke. The aliens' helmet sensors couldn't see through it. By the time they cleared the room, Miller was gone. On the Vex command ship, General Krell slammed his fist on the console. Find him. How did a primitive slip away from 4 elite scouts? Outside, the tactical team landed. 30 warriors in advanced battle armor spread out around Miller's outpost. Their leader, Captain Drex, approached the building. "Breaching now, General," Drex reported. "The human will be captured within minutes." As Drex's team forced open the door, a simple tripwire activated. Nothing happened immediately. The aliens entered cautiously, scanning for traps. "Primitive dwelling," Drex commented. "No sign of advanced technology." Then they heard a hissing sound. From the ventilation system, Miller's homemade beer was being vaporized into the air. The compounds in the hops and barley confused the aliens' breathing filters and scrambled their comm systems. "What's happening?" Krell demanded as the tactical team's communications became garbled. Half a mile away, Miller sat on a ridge with a small control panel. He watched through his rifle scope as the aliens stumbled around his home, their movements becoming disorganized. "Rule 1 of Mars survival," Miller muttered. "Always have a backup home." He pressed another button. Small explosives, not strong enough to kill, but enough to disorient, detonated around his property. The aliens scattered in confusion. Miller switched on his old military radio and broadcast on all frequencies, knowing the alien ships would pick it up. "Earth Command, this is Miller on Mars Outpost 17. First contact made with hostile forces, sending visual data now." He wasn't actually sending anything to Earth, but the aliens wouldn't know that. In the confusion, 5 aliens stumbled into the sand traps Miller had dug years ago, just in case. Another group triggered the sonic emitters he'd installed to keep Martian rats away from his garden. A high-pitched sound drove the aliens to their knees, their sensitive hearing overwhelmed. Captain Drex tried to regroup his forces, but Miller had studied their patterns. Each time they formed up, he triggered another distraction from his remote position. On the command ship, General Krell watched in disbelief. "One human," he growled. "One human is making fools of our best troops." "Sir," his second-in-command said hesitantly, "our intelligence said humans were simple creatures. This one seems prepared. Prepared for an alien invasion. Impossible." Below, Miller moved to a new position as aliens began searching the ridgeline. He grabbed his emergency pack, which contained his weapons, supplies, and a 6-pack of his best beer. "Time to introduce myself to the neighbors," Miller said, watching as a larger ship descended toward the Mars colony 20 miles away. He took a swig of beer, tossed the bottle aside, and headed toward his hidden rover. Behind him, the elite Vex troops were still trying to figure out how one human had embarrassed them so thoroughly. They had severely underestimated humanity. Miller drove his hidden rover through the narrow canyons of Mars, taking paths no orbital scanner could track. The Vex ships buzzed overhead like angry hornets, searching for him. "Amateur hour," Miller muttered, checking his oxygen levels. He'd designed this rover himself, with heat shields that masked its signature. 10 years of living on Mars had taught him to always prepare for the worst. As he approached the new Armstrong colony, he saw smoke rising from several buildings. The aliens had already attacked. "Damn it," he cursed, stopping behind a ridge. He pulled out his old military binoculars and surveyed the scene. Vex troops marched humans out of their homes at gunpoint. Large ships hovered above the colony center. Miller counted at least 200 alien soldiers. "Too many for one man," he admitted. As he watched, wondering what to do next, a hand touched his shoulder. Miller spun around, raising his rifle, only to find himself facing another human. A woman in a sleek black uniform with no visible markings. "James Miller?" she asked quietly. Who's asking? Commander Alex Torres, Earth Defense Force. She showed him a small badge that glowed with embedded tech. We've been watching you. Miller lowered his weapon slowly. Earth Defense Force. Never heard of it. Torres smiled. That's the point. We've existed in secret for 15 years, preparing for this day. You knew aliens would attack. We didn't know who, but we knew someone would. She pointed to a hidden ship, camouflaged against the Martian landscape. We need to move. Your little party tricks got their attention, but we need more than beer traps to win this war. Inside Torres' ship, Miller met her team of 6 soldiers, all wearing the same black uniforms. Advanced weapons and technology filled the cargo hold. You've been busy, Miller commented. Earth has been preparing since the first signals were detected years ago. Torres explained. Most people don't know about us. We've developed technologies based on what we could intercept from deep space communications. As Torres' ship lifted off, staying low to avoid detection, a new alert sounded on their radar. Unknown vessel approaching, reported one of Torres' team. Not Vex design. Everyone tensed as a sleek, golden ship appeared beside them. It matched their speed perfectly. A voice came through their communication system, speaking perfect English. Humans, we come as allies against our ancient enemies. The Vex have troubled our galaxy for millennia. Torres looked at Miller. Another alien race. The golden ship sent them coordinates for a meeting point in the asteroid belt. Against Miller's advice, Torres decided to follow. We need allies, she insisted. The Vex fleet is massive. In a hidden base inside a hollowed-out asteroid, Miller and Torres met the Meridians. Tall, elegant beings with skin that seemed to shimmer like the surface of water. We have watched your species with great interest, said their leader, who called himself Thal. Particularly this one. He pointed at Miller. Me? Miller asked, surprised. Your resistance against Vex forces was unexpected. They believe humans would surrender immediately. Thal showed them a holographic display of the solar system, with thousands of Vex ships approaching. The Vex conquer through overwhelming force and fear, but you, Miller, showed no fear. This intrigues us. I've faced worse, Miller shrugged. Torres interrupted. Can you help us fight them? Thal nodded slowly. We can offer technology and knowledge. But you humans have something we lack, something the Vex fear. What's that? Miller asked. Unpredictability. Creativity in combat. The willingness to smirk in the face of superior forces. Thal looked directly at Miller, and apparently the strange ability to use fermented grain drinks as weapons. Miller couldn't help but laugh. You mean my beer? Whatever you call it, we detected compounds that disrupt Vex neural networks. Something so simple, yet effective. Torres looked at Miller with new respect. Looks like your homebrewing hobby might help save humanity. Miller just smirked and reached for the last beer in his pack. To new allies, then. The real war was just beginning. The Vex invasion of Mars began in full force 3 days later. Hundreds of ships descended on the Red Planet, targeting the major colonies first. But the humans were ready. In the underground command center beneath New Armstrong Colony, Miller stood with Torres and 3 Meridian advisors, watching the battle unfold on large screens. They're falling for it, Miller said, pointing to the map where Vex troops poured into what looked like an abandoned mining facility. Traps sprung in Sector 7, reported a young soldier at the communication station. On the screen, dozens of red dots representing Vex soldiers suddenly disappeared. Torres nodded with satisfaction. Your idea worked. The old mining tunnels made perfect ambush points. Miller shrugged. Mars miners have been setting traps for claim jumpers for years. Just scaled it up a bit. On the Vex command ship, General Krull pounded his fist against a holographic display showing yet another failed attack. How are they anticipating our every move? He roared. Their technology is inferior. Their numbers are smaller. His science officer approached cautiously. "Sir, we've been studying the humans. They don't think like other species we've conquered." "Explain," Krell demanded. "Most intelligent species evolve to become more peaceful and logical as they advance. Humans did not." The science officer displayed brain scans of captured human soldiers. They maintained their primitive aggressive instincts while developing complex problem-solving abilities. Krell stared at the scans. "So they combine animal cunning with technological skill." "Exactly, sir. And there's more. They're unpredictable. Our tactical computers cannot model their behavior because they sometimes make choices that appear irrational but prove effective." Krell recalled the first human he'd observed, Miller, and how he had smiled and offered drinks instead of showing proper fear. "I want this Miller human captured," Krell decided. "He seems to be the source of their unusual tactics." Back on Mars, Miller led a small team through the rubble of what had once been a research facility. They moved quietly, using hand signals to communicate. Each carried a pack of what they now called beer grenades. Miller's homebrew specially modified to affect Vex neural systems. "Patrol ahead," whispered Jones, the team's scout. 5 Vex, heavily armed. Miller nodded and pulled out a small drone the size of a fly. The Meridians had provided the technology, but it was human ingenuity that had programmed it to mimic Martian insects. The drone flew ahead, landed on a Vex soldier's helmet, and injected a tiny amount of beer extract through a microscopic needle. Within seconds, the affected soldier began shooting wildly, its neural network disrupted. The other Vex turned to their comrade in confusion, giving Miller's team the perfect opportunity to attack. In the asteroid base, Torres met with Thal and other Meridian leaders. "The Vex are focusing their efforts on capturing Miller," Thal reported. "They believe he is the key to understanding human combat behavior." Torres frowned. "Should we pull him back to safety?" Thal's expression, as much as a Meridian could show expression, suggested amusement. "Would he agree to that?" "Not a chance," Torres admitted. "He'd say he's exactly where he needs to be." "This is why we sought your alliance," Thal explained. "For millennia, the Vex have conquered through predictable patterns of force. Their tactics are perfect against logical opponents. But humans—" Thal paused, searching for the right words. "Humans embrace chaos. You see options that our species would never consider." On the battlefield, Miller's team successfully disabled the Vex patrol and captured valuable intelligence data. As they made their way back to base, Miller spotted a Vex scout ship following them. Instead of hiding, he stood in the open, raised his beer bottle in a mock toast, and pressed the detonator for the explosives they'd planted along their trail. The scout ship swerved to avoid the blasts and crashed into a ravine. Miller took a swig of beer. Works every time. The human factor was turning the tide of war. In the lab beneath New Armstrong Colony, Miller watched as Dr. Watson analyzed the results on her screen. "It's definitely the hops," she said, pointing to a molecular diagram. "Something in this plant disrupts their neural pathways. Not enough to kill them, but plenty to mess up their coordination and communications." Miller picked up a bottle of his homebrew. "So my terrible beer is actually a weapon." "Your beer isn't terrible," Torres said, entering the lab. "But yes, it's now officially a weapon. The Meridians have confirmed it." Thal stepped forward, his shimmering skin reflecting the lab lights. "We've never seen anything like it. The Vex evolved on a world without these plant compounds. Their systems have no defense against them." Miller grinned. "So we're going to fight an alien invasion with beer?" "Essentially, yes," Torres replied, not smiling. "We're calling it Operation Brewmaster." 2 days later, the plan was ready. Engineers had modified the air filtration systems on captured Vex vessels to disperse beer compounds. Special Forces teams were equipped with what the soldiers now called hop grenades. But the masterstroke came from Miller himself. "We need to hit their command ship," he explained, pointing to a massive vessel in orbit around Mars. "General Krell controls everything from there. If we disrupt their chain of command, their whole invasion falls apart. Torres shook her head. It's too heavily guarded. We'd never get close. We don't need to get close, Miller said. We need to get invited. On the Vex command ship, General Krell received an unexpected message. The human Miller was offering to surrender himself. It's obviously a trap, Krell's second-in-command warned. Of course it is, Krell agreed. But we need this human. Our scientists say his brain patterns are key to understanding their tactics. He turned to his security chief. Bring him in, but with maximum security. Strip him of all equipment, and scan him for weapons. When Miller was brought aboard the Vex flagship, he was wearing only a simple jumpsuit provided by his captors. His hands were bound, and 6 elite guards surrounded him. Krell studied the human with his 4 eyes. Finally, we meet. You've caused me considerable trouble, Miller. Miller just smiled. Nice ship you got here. Very clean. Your species' resistance is impressive but futile, Krell continued. Our fleet numbers in the thousands. Your defenses will fall within days. Maybe, Miller shrugged. Or maybe not. Want a beer? He nodded to a small pack one of the guards had brought aboard, the only possession Miller had insisted on bringing. Your primitive drinks do not interest me, Krell said dismissively. Shame, Miller replied. It's my special brew. As they talked, Miller was secretly counting down in his head. Torres and her team would be in position by now, waiting for his signal. You know what I don't understand about you, Vex? Miller asked, stalling for time. You're so predictable. All this technology, and you still think like machines. Krell leaned forward. And how do humans think? Like this, Miller said, then whistled a specific pattern. The signal. Immediately, alarms blared throughout the ship. The guards turned, confused. Intruder alert in engineering, announced a voice. Intruder alert in weapons control. While the guards were distracted, Miller headbutted the nearest one and grabbed its weapon. He shot the control panel for his restraints, freeing his hands. How? Krell demanded as chaos erupted around them. Miller smirked and grabbed the pack containing his beer. You scanned me for weapons, but you didn't scan my beer. He pulled out a bottle and cracked it open. These bottles have been designed to mask the Meridian technology inside them. As Miller spoke, the ship's ventilation system activated, spreading beer compounds throughout the vessel. All around them, Vex soldiers began stumbling, their coordination failing. Miller took a long drink. Nothing better than a cold one during an invasion. Operation Brewmaster had begun. Chaos ruled the Vex flagship. Alarms blared as confused soldiers stumbled through corridors, their neural networks disrupted by beer compounds flowing through the ventilation system. Miller ran through the ship, ducking into side passages whenever he spotted groups of Vex who still seemed functional. In his ear, a small Meridian communication device kept him connected to Torres and her team. We've reached the engine room, Torres reported, planting the devices now. Miller grinned. Good. I'm heading to the bridge. Time to say hello to General Krell properly. Behind him, heavy footsteps echoed. 4 elite Vex guards had spotted him and were giving chase. Unlike the others, they wore sealed armor with independent breathing systems. Of course it couldn't be easy, Miller muttered, ducking into a maintenance shaft. The narrow passage forced the larger aliens to follow single file. Miller reached into his pack and pulled out his last beer bottle. He had saved it for a special occasion, and this qualified. He twisted the cap, but instead of drinking, he poured the contents onto the floor of the shaft and tossed a small spark device from his boot into the puddle. The beer ignited, creating a wall of blue flame that the Vex couldn't pass. Never waste good beer, Miller sighed. But sometimes sacrifices must be made. On the bridge, General Krell was trying desperately to regain control of his ship. How can one human cause so much damage? He roared, slamming his fist on a control panel. The doors to the bridge hissed open. Miller stepped through, carrying a captured Vex weapon. "It's not just me," Miller said casually. "Humans are pretty good at causing trouble in general." Before Krell could respond, Miller fired at the ceiling, hitting the main ventilation outlet. A concentrated dose of beer extract sprayed across the bridge, affecting everyone except Miller, who had taken the antidote developed by Dr. Watson. As Krell and his officers collapsed in confusion, Miller walked to the main communications console. "This is James Miller, formerly of Earth Special Forces, currently enjoying a Martian retirement." He broadcast to all Vex ships. "Your command vessel is now under human control. Your general is currently taking a little nap." Back on Mars, humans and Meridians watched as the Vex fleet fell into disarray. Without central command, some ships retreated while others continued fighting, but with uncoordinated efforts. In the weeks that followed, humanity pushed the advantage. Using the captured Vex flagship and its technology, combined with Meridian assistance, Earth forces reclaimed Mars colony by colony. Miller found himself reluctantly accepting the role of military advisor, training special forces in combining human tactics with alien technology. "The key is unpredictability," he explained to a room full of soldiers. "Vex think in patterns. We don't have to. That's our advantage." One young soldier raised her hand. "Sir, is it true you took down an elite squad with just beer?" Miller laughed. "The beer helped, but it was really about using what they didn't expect. They came looking for advanced weapons, and I used my home brewing equipment. They expected fear, and I offered them a drink." In the Meridian Command Center, Thal showed Torres a disturbing message they had intercepted. "The Vex Supreme Commander is coming," Thal said gravely, "with their entire armada. They refuse to accept that a primitive species could defeat them." Torres frowned. "How many ships?" "Thousands, more than we can possibly fight." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Get Miller in here. I have a feeling we'll need more of his crazy ideas." When Miller arrived and heard the news, he didn't look worried. Instead, he smiled that familiar, confident smile. "So they're bringing their biggest guns to the fight?" he asked. Thal nodded solemnly. "Their most advanced battle platforms. They're genetically engineered super soldiers." Miller just shrugged. "Good. Bigger they are, harder they fall." Torres stared at him. "You have a plan?" "Always," Miller replied. "And I'm going to need a lot more beer." The real battle for Earth was about to begin. The Vex Armada arrived 2 weeks later. Thousands of warships filled Earth's orbit, blocking out the sun in some regions. People around the world looked up in fear as the massive fleet darkened the sky. On the Meridian diplomatic vessel orbiting the moon, Miller adjusted his uniform. Earth's leaders had promoted him to humanity's military liaison, a fancy title he hadn't asked for. "Ready?" Torres asked, now wearing the insignia of Earth Defense Force Commander. Miller nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be to meet the alien who wants to destroy our planet." They entered the negotiation room where Earth's political leaders waited nervously. The Meridian representatives stood to one side, their shimmering skin reflecting the ship's lights. A flash of light announced the arrival of the Vex delegation. The Supreme Commander was taller than other Vex, with gold-plated armor and 6 arms instead of 4. 20 elite guards flanked him, weapons ready. "Humans," the Supreme Commander's voice boomed through a translation device. "Your resistance has been noted. It is impressive but futile." Earth's president stepped forward. "We wish to negotiate peace." "There will be no negotiation," the Supreme Commander replied. "Only terms of surrender. You will submit to Vex authority or be eliminated." Miller, standing quietly at the back, caught Torres' eye and gave a slight nod. The Supreme Commander continued listing demands. Earth's resources, human labor, complete disarmament. As he spoke, Miller casually walked to a small table in the corner where refreshments had been set up. "By tomorrow, your major cities will be under our control," the Supreme Commander declared. "Our most advanced battle platforms will." Miller cleared his throat loudly, interrupting the alien's speech. All eyes turned to him. "Sorry to cut in," Miller said, reaching under the table and pulling out a cooler. "But before you continue, would anyone like a beer?" The Vex guards raised their weapons. The Supreme Commander's 4 eyes narrowed. "You dare interrupt with offers of primitive refreshment?" he snarled. Miller just smirked. He popped open a beer bottle and took a long drink. "Thing about us humans," Miller said, wiping his mouth, "we're real good at appearing primitive when we need to." He pressed a button on his wrist device. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room, showing hundreds of human ships emerging from hiding places around the moon and beyond. "While you were busy threatening us," Miller explained, "we were busy learning. Those Vex ships we captured, we didn't just study them, we improved them." The Supreme Commander stared at the display in shock. "Impossible. Where did these vessels come from?" "You've been watching Earth," Torres said, stepping forward. "You never thought to check the dark side of the moon." The display showed human ships moving into attack positions around the Vex fleet. "And the best part," Miller added, "we found a weakness in your flagship's shield design. A single shot in the right place, and your entire command structure goes down." The Supreme Commander's composure finally broke. "How? How did primitive beings like you advance so quickly?" Miller walked up to the towering alien, completely unafraid. He offered a beer bottle to the Supreme Commander. "While you were evolving to conquer the stars," Miller said, "we were evolving to survive each other. That made us pretty good at adapting." The Supreme Commander reluctantly took the offered bottle, a gesture of defeat. "Your terms?" he asked. Miller smiled. "First, you leave our solar system. Second, you never come back. Third," he gestured to the bottle in the alien's hand, "you try that beer and tell me if it's really as bad as my friends say." As the terms of surrender were discussed, Miller slipped away to the observation deck. He watched Earth spinning peacefully below, opened his last beer, and smiled. Humanity had faced its greatest threat and survived, armed with nothing but human ingenuity, meridian technology, and a decent batch of homebrew. The universe would never underestimate humans again.